News traveled slowly in 1900, yet some words could ignite a city, just like today's viral posts. At the turn of the 20th century, in a bustling American city still learning to balance industry, immigration, and democracy, a young poet spent his days among the dusty shelves of the local public library. He was barely 19, but his eyes had already seen the clamor of streets, the exhaustion of laborers, and the whispers of discontent that stirred quietly beneath the city's polished surface. The library was both refuge and revelation. Unlike the noisy streets, here the world slowed. Tall windows let in diffused light that fell across rows of leather-bound books, and the smell of parchment and ink became his constant companion. Every morning, before the clatter of streetcars and the cries of vendors could reach him, he would open a notebook, sharpen his pencil, and try to capture the pulse of the city in words. The young man was aware of history happening beyond the walls of his sanctuary. Across the city, workers were organizing, calling for fair wages and safer conditions. Immigrants crowded tenement buildings, sharing news of strikes and marches from factories and docks. Newspapers, often biased or incomplete, filtered only fragments of the truth. But he had discovered a more intimate way to understand events: poetry. He wrote about a factory fire that killed several men, about strikes that ended with broken promises, about mothers who worried for their sons working in dangerous conditions. His lines were precise, often stark, but they carried an emotional truth that the headlines could not. For him, words were not only art, they were testimony. Every evening after the library closed, he would walk the dimly lit streets toward a small boarding house, carrying notebooks stuffed with fragments of thoughts. He read aloud to himself, trying out different cadences and rhythms, listening to the city echo back. In quiet moments, he imagined the workers hearing his words, even if only in whispers. Perhaps, he thought, poetry could bridge the distance between experience and understanding. The young poet did not have formal connections. No mentor guided him through the literary salons of the elite. Yet the city itself became his teacher. He observed political rallies, noting how speakers could sway crowds with half-truths or promises of justice. He listened to union meetings, absorbing how frustration turned into organization. His poetry began to reflect not just emotion, but analysis, a blend of art and civic engagement. He submitted small pieces to local newspapers, often anonymously. Occasionally, a poem would appear nestled between advertisements, not noticed by most readers. A few others, however, paused and read. They wrote back letters praising the insight, the precision, the courage to address uncomfortable realities. Encouraged, he continued, sometimes walking miles through rain or snow to deliver his work to sympathetic editors. One day, a series of protests escalated near the docks. Laborers demanded shorter work hours, safer conditions, and respect from factory owners. The young poet, notebook in hand, followed at a distance, observing, noting every chant, every banner, every argument. By night, he translated these observations into verse, capturing not only facts, but the emotional resonance of each encounter, the fear, hope, courage, and frustration. In a time before photography could capture daily struggle, before radio or instant communication, his poetry became a record. Each poem was a testimony to the lives that authorities often ignored. Factory whistles, clanging machinery, and streetcar bells became part of his vocabulary, his words intertwined with the rhythm of the city itself. The poet also experimented with different forms. Sonnets reflected the rigid schedules of factory life. Free verse mirrored the chaos of protest crowds. Haiku captured fleeting moments of beauty in unexpected places, like a child playing among crates while adults argued about union dues. He learned to match form to function, understanding that structure could carry meaning as much as content. As months turned to years, his reputation among certain circles grew quietly. Other poets and journalists, especially those sympathetic to workers' causes, began to recognize his voice. Still, he remained largely unknown to the public at large. Fame was not his goal. Truth was. He wanted the city to hear what it often refused to see.
In the winter of 1904, a particularly harsh snowstorm paralyzed transportation. Factories halted, and many workers were trapped inside cramped lodgings. The young poet used the downtime to write a long piece about the cumulative hardship of immigrant laborers, about the ways in which city growth often came at the expense of human lives. He sent the manuscript to multiple newspapers and literary journals. Some ignored it, others printed excerpts, carefully edited to avoid offending wealthy advertisers. Despite obstacles, the poet continued. He became a fixture at the library, helping younger students find books and understand the social currents around them. He encouraged discussion, debate, and observation, emphasizing that literature could illuminate reality, not just entertain. He mentored several local youths, passing on both technical skills and a moral commitment to witness. By 1906, tensions in the city reached a boiling point. Strikes grew, and police clashed with demonstrators. Fires, thefts, and corruption were rampant. The young poet, once an observer, became a chronicler in real time. He walked through smoky streets with notebooks, recording details for poems that would circulate in pamphlets, copied by hand, shared quietly among laborers and sympathetic readers. He also faced personal struggles. Food was scarce at times, lodging was cramped and often cold, illness was a constant threat. Yet these hardships informed his work. He wrote vividly because he had lived it. His descriptions of fatigue, hunger, and risk resonated with those who recognized their own lives in his words. Over time, his work attracted attention from city reformers and progressive intellectuals. They began to quote lines from his poems in reports advocating labor reform, using his words as evidence of systemic injustice. Still, he rarely accepted credit publicly. The poet believed that the story was bigger than the author. The struggle belonged to everyone who endured it. By 1910, the poet had published several collections, each documenting the life of the city's working class, immigrants, and everyday citizens. Though still young, he had already influenced the discourse around labor, urban life, and the power of words to inspire change. His poetry blurred the lines between literature and journalism, demonstrating that art could hold society accountable. Reflecting on those years, the poet often considered the contrast between his quiet library mornings and the tumultuous streets outside. He realized that while history might remember the names of mayors, factory owners, and political leaders, it was the unnoticed voices, the poets, the observers, the quiet chroniclers, who preserved the truth of everyday life. In his later years, the poet continued to mentor younger writers and contribute to local journals. Though he never sought fame, his work shaped public opinion, inspired reform, and created a record of city life in early 20th century America that might otherwise have been lost. By capturing both the factual reality and the emotional depth of the city's struggles, the young poet became more than an artist. He became a witness, a teacher, and a bridge between history and humanity. Even today, one can trace the echoes of those poems in modern urban literature, in social advocacy writing, and in the ways writers attempt to make unseen struggles visible. The city may have changed, but the power of words to illuminate injustice remains the same, connecting 1900 to now.